Greetings everyone, this is Tim Anderson, aka Renfail, and welcome to the latest episode of Mondays in MMORPGs, where I cover all things related to the genre and the pros and cons of the various systems. Today we're going to be talking about storyline in MMORPGs, in video games as a whole actually, and how important story is to the IP. But we're also going to be talking about storyline as it relates to quest hubs, and why we've made some of the design decisions that we've made in regards to mechanics in the Saga of Lucimia to put story at the forefront. So before we get into quest hubs and mechanics and design decisions that we've made, I want to look at an IP that did story so horribly wrong that they came out and admitted it later on down the road and changed what they were doing for the second version of their game. And I'm talking about Destiny right now. So the first Destiny game, the bad guys were very generically lumped together in this collective called the Darkness. And for those of you who played Destiny, up until I think it was the Taken King expansion, the storyline was incredibly generic and you just weren't really invested in it because it was just this thing, this idea. And earlier in 2017, Kotaku did an interview with Luke Smith, who's the game director on Destiny 2, and he basically came out and point-blank admitted that they had no idea what the Darkness actually meant. It was just a very generic set piece that they set up, and they screwed up. And I'm going to quote something here. I'm going to put the article in the video description text, so don't forget to click on it if you want to read the interview. But at some point, and I'm quoting here, quote, "We didn't know what it was, and for a period, we chose that we're going to lump all of the races in together. And you see this in the tooltips of the game, quote, Minions of Darkness, unquote. And we had taken all of the races and said, oh, they'll just be the Darkness. But that's not what the IP deserves. It's like literally not, end quote." So the first thing I took away from that when I read that was, God, I'm so glad that someone's actually taking the time to say that they screwed up, because there was no story in the earliest days of Destiny 1. It was just like, you're the light, they're the dark, go forth and extinguish, get rid of the darkness, you are the light. And it never felt meaningful. Now, we've talked a lot, and there's a blog post from a few years ago talking about, what determines, what defines epic in a storyline, and we've looked at past heroes. We've used Jason and the Argonauts. We've used Zeus and the Titans. We've used the Dragonlance Chronicles, Frodo and the Fellowship of the Ring. We've looked at literature to come up with examples of what defines an epic storyline. And if you've listened to some of our previous episodes, we've always come back to, for us, group-based content is one of the most important elements, because going back to the Milk Run episode that we did on the very first episode of this show, we talked about how no one cares about hearing about when Thor goes to get a roll of toilet paper, or when Zeus has to go to the grocery store and pick up a gallon of milk. No one wants to hear about that stuff because it's not interesting. What we want to hear about, what we want to listen to, are stories where these characters, godlike and heroic that they are, have to go do something that is so epic in scope that they need other people to accomplish those tasks. So with that, I want to roll into the next part of this episode, which is talking about quest hubs. Now, if you look at most modern MMORPGs, quests are designed not for storyline purposes, but as a way to earn experience points and to progress your character. So the vast majority of players in every game they play, when they hit a quest dialog box, you're in a quest hub, there's 20 quests around you, you've got 20 NPCs with little glowing exclamation points above their head telling you that they have quests to offer. And I would argue that 99% of players will just hit the space bar as quickly as they can, or the escape button, whatever it is for that particular game, to skip the dialogue to get to the accept button so that they can get the glowing trail leading them to the objective, or to get the POI on the map that leads them to the objective. No one's actually reading the quest dialogue. A, because it's a milk run quest and it doesn't really matter because it's not interesting. And B, because it's a milk run quest and it doesn't matter and it's not really interesting. So one of the first things we did when we said, how are we going to design story in our world? How are we going to do quests? We said, let's look at tabletop. In a tabletop setting, when you go to a tavern, for example, there's not 20 NPCs offering you a quest. The DM, as a general rule, has 1, possibly 2 NPCs in that area who are going to offer the players a quest. And it's generally not a milk run. It's generally something that's entertaining, involving, and will require multiple sessions to complete. It's called a campaign. Now, when we started looking at how did we want to design stories in our game, we said we want stories in our world. We want these quest lines to be campaigns. We don't want them to be milk runs. We feel that characters are going to be creating their own milk runs on their own, in the sense that, excuse me, players meet up on a Tuesday. They don't have 8 players. They've only got 3 or 4 of their group together tonight. They're waiting for the rest of the group to log in a couple of nights. So what do they do for the night? Okay, let's run outside and gather hides. Let's go kill bandits at the bandit camp. Let's go explore west and see if we can find a new dungeon or a new ruins that we can explore with the full group on Saturday when everyone's here. Those are things where players themselves are the ones creating the milk runs, the things that are done in between the campaign moments where you're logging in with your full group or your full guild and doing a raid, etc. These are the moments where you're going to be doing the little things which we call micro sessions, these little 30-minute sections of gameplay where you're going out there and doing little things in the world. Players are going to be creating those on their own, so we don't feel the need to make those. Now, we've also stripped experience points out of the equation. So quests in our game do not have experience points tied to them. So the only reason you're doing quests in our game is for lore purposes or for gear purposes. Now, the other thing we've done is because we don't have a mini-map and we don't have glowing points in the map, a POI that tells you where to go, and we don't have glowing trails leading you from point A to point B, if you don't read the quest dialogue, you're not going to know how to get where it is that you're supposed to go. Because the quest dialogue, just as in a campaign, when you're sitting down at a tabletop session, the Dungeon Master is giving you tips on how to get to where it is that you're supposed to go. In our game, the quest dialogue will be giving you directions and landmarks that you need to be paying attention to in order to find where it is that you're supposed to be going to. So if you spacebar through the dialogue or you hit the escape button to skip through all that dialogue, you're never going to know how to get to the place you're supposed to be going in the first place. Now, we've heard all the arguments. Well, players are just going to take a screenshot of that, and then the second person who comes down the road, they're going to be able to go to a wiki, and they're going to read that dialogue, and they're going to know exactly how to get to point B, and they're not going to have to figure it out because someone else will have done it for them. You're not incorrect. But for those of you who are new to what we're doing, one of the other things that we are doing is we are going in and periodically changing where NPCs are located and where ground spawns are located for quests. Which means if player A puts it up on a wiki and says that it's in location X, and 3 months later player B comes down the pipeline and does that same quest, we might have moved where the next NPC or the ground spawn or the mobs needed for that quest are located in the game world. And the best part about this is we're not telling players in the patch notes that we've changed things. So the only way someone's going to know is for player B when he gets there going, what the hell, I thought this was supposed to be here and it's not. There will always be in-game clues left behind. So in the case of Ranger Bob, when player B goes to try to find Ranger Bob, there will be in-game clues, whether it's a note that Ranger Bob left behind, or if you have the proper tracking skills, you can see goblin tracks leading away from the campsite, or whatever the case may be. There will be in-game clues that will let you know where you need to go and which direction you need to head to try to find that NPC once again, or the ground spawn, or whatever it is. And in the case of, say, dungeon entrances, those might be a little more static in the sense that players will eventually mark those on a map and put those up on a wiki. We can't really fight against that too much because it's just the age that we live in. But we also are coming up with ideas on the back end for world events that will be changing the landscape so that maybe there's a cave-in. Maybe the bridge is out. Maybe there's reasons why you can't get to that entrance, and if you want to get into that dungeon, you're going to have to find a way around, a new entrance that no one has ever found before. And by making these changes behind the scenes and not updating the patch notes, we're making sure that the players are invested in the story of the world and paying attention to what NPCs tell them, whether it's a quest giver or just a random barkeep or someone on the street who has a rumor. You know, if you're in a town and you see 3 or 4 NPCs talking about the same thing, talking about the same rumor, chances are that's something you may be wanting to check out. So these are things that in the sense of what we're trying to develop with our world, we're trying to make storyline mean enough that players actually pay attention to it. And we're also making design decisions that require players to pay attention, because if they don't, they're going to be at a loss for what they need to do. And yes, to some small degree, eventually players will be putting things on wikis, and we can't do a lot about that. The one thing we've talked about internally, and we've talked about with our community as well, is having an official wiki that we ourselves kind of host and work with several of our community members to try to keep things as official as possible. And in that sense, trying to keep that wiki as realistic as we possibly can. But we also can't, we can't go around the fact that there's websites out there that already have established histories, 10 or 15, 20 years of histories of being places where players put wikis and quest dialogues. But what we're looking to do is try to keep the story fresh enough and changing on a constant basis, whether it's through manual manipulation or dynamic manipulation of objectives and locations, that we're always keeping players on their toes. So, in closing, we stripped experience points out of the equation, so you're not doing quests just to level up. So the only reason you're doing quests is for gear or lore purposes. And regardless of which of those purposes you choose to do it for, if you're not paying attention to the quest dialogue, you won't know where to go. And relying on someone's version of a screenshot that they put up on a wiki may not be the best solution, because we may have moved things and you won't know it until you get there. So, what do you guys think? Do you like storylines in your games, or are you one of those people who just spacebar through to the end because you want to get to the epic loot as quickly as possible? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to stay tuned for the next episode of Mondays in MMORPGs. Stay safe out there. We'll see you guys in the next game. Cheers.